at 11.
I don't like that question to be raised. I have told you on more than one occasion.
I'm simply asking a question. We are doing a profile.
And I'm answering you the question. How many more times must I answer it?
I made the decision. It was my responsibility. I don't regret making it. I stand by it, and the facts prove that I was right. Now let's stop it.
Do you think, Senator, the day will come in your lifetime when we will see an integrated South?
No.
You have called for self-defense units ready to execute on the spot those who threaten the Negro.
I don't think that I said that.
Yes, you did.
No, I don't think I said that.
I'll probably tell you his name. Let's see, Dan. Hey, this is my favorite one. What's your last name?
Why are you doing this now? I'm not running a boiler room operation. Whatever happened to Wild Bill's, Mr. Garth?
No comments. No comments. Not going to talk.
Well, then can we talk in private?
Nope.
Because you're contemptible.
Be careful, because I'm going to call my lawyer right now.
That's a question that comes back to this whole cover-up thing. Cover up what?
One thing you learn in politics is to control your emotions.
You mean if you really hate a reporter, you don't let him know?
Smile at him.
Oh, dear.
Would you like your husband to be president?
I don't think it's a job you'd wish on anybody you even liked, much less you loved.
I want you to get it right. I don't want to look like an ass.
Right.
Okay?
Gotcha.
Because my kids are watching this.
Right.
Imam President Sadat of Egypt calls you a lunatic.
You got a nice smile, and I'll fight for you now, boy. You are a sweet kid, you know that?
This portion of this broadcast is brought to you by Chrysler, where luxury is engineered to give you the advantage.
Mike Wallace, Then and Now is what we've called it. An exercise in some nostalgia, yes, but something more than that, we hope. Something not so musty. It is a hindsight look at some of the major figures of the past 40 years and some of the more entertaining minor figures, too.
These are fascinating characters you'll be hearing from on grainy black and white from the 50s and the 60s.
Abortion.
And in living color after that.
Your friends were rich.
It's not just the kings, it's the con men, too. Saints and sinners both. Politicians, entertainers, corruptors and idealists. Men and women we've rubbed up against in a variety of venues.
Whoa, Mike has just been shoved down on the floor there. Mike, get your...
If there is one thing I've learned in 40-plus years of bumping elbows and asking questions, it is, with some astonishment, that there are lots of folks out there who do like to talk when they simply shouldn't.
For one small example, Ernest Sinclair, an affable California ex-con who in 1978 was making his living selling phony university degrees to any and all who came to the tiny Los Angeles office he had dubbed California Pacifica University.
Can you believe it?
How are you?
60 minutes today. Hold the phone. I'll probably tell you his name. Let's see. Dan. Hey, this is my favorite one. Gosh. What's your last name?
Wallace. Mike Wallace.
Mike Wallace.
Having satisfied himself he had the right man from 60 Minutes in his office, Sinclair explained how he could, for a fee, confer an academic degree on almost anybody in just under 1 hour.
$1,400 for a BA, right.
And they go up to $3,500.
Right.
But we knew how easy it was, for our 60 Minutes cameraman Wade Bingham had already bought a Master of Arts degree from Sinclair.
Right. And he gave you $2,150.
I wish he'd give me $3,500.
He gave you $2,150.
I hope his cashier check's good.
And you gave him this degree, California Pacifica University, hereby confers upon Wade Bingham the degree of Master of Arts.
No problem.
Hereunto affixed, and by the way, you misspelled hereunto.
I know it. We have it corrected already.
Sinclair eventually wound up in the slammer as a result of what he told us, for U.S. postal authorities were watching the broadcast, and later they arrested Mr. Sinclair for mail fraud. Now, if selling phony university degrees was a hazardous occupation, hanging one on your office wall when 60 Minutes walked in could be downright embarrassing, as, for example, when a con man named Dr. R.J. Rudd agreed in 1978 to talk to me about his California cancer clinic and its so-called miracle cancer cure.
You're not a medical doctor.
No, I'm not.
You're an economist?
I have a Ph.D.
In
economics and one in philosophy. My two PhDs, one came from the Tennessee University and from a...
University of Tennessee?
No, the Christian Tennessee University. Then I got one from Florida, Tennessee, Trinity Christian College in Florida.
Oh, you have them over here?
Yes, there's my two degrees.
I see. Why don't we go over and take a look? Where is that?
It's in, I believe that now they're present in court. I believe it's in Fort Lauderdale.
Well, it says here it was signed and sealed at Brownsville, Texas back in 1973.
Okay, that was a branch of that operation, you see.
And this is the Tennessee Christian University. And where is this university? What town?
It's, I believe that one is close to, let me think of the name just a minute, Chattanooga.
Officials in all 3 states told us later that Dr. Rudd's diplomas were mail-order degrees from non-existent universities, and he, too, eventually wound up in jail.
We have all of us heard the joke down the years, you know it's going to be a tough week when you show up at your office on a Monday morning and the 60 Minutes camera crew is waiting.
You're Alan Gorin? I want to talk to you about the franchise business because I've heard that you know a good deal about it.
I don't know a thing about it.
One of the hallmarks of 60 Minutes through its early years was the technique we used to come upon a quarry unawares.
Whatever happened to Wild Bill's, Mr. Gorin?
To flush out a miscreant who just didn't want to talk to him.
Won't you talk to me?
I wonder if I could talk to you just for a moment, sir.
Someone dubbed it the ambush interview.
Dr. Rubin?
They were fun and often quite revealing. Just a little too revealing in 1977 for one Los Angeles child pornography dealer.
That is not the films I'm going to sell to him. That is different films.
We gave you $40. You gave us these films. Where did these come from?
I don't know. He put over there. This is my films. And that's all.
You sold them. You got our $40.
Wait.
We got the film.
After a while, it became apparent to us that we were getting more heat than light out of these ambush interviews, so we used the technique very infrequently now.
Don't touch me.
And only after our letters and telegrams and telephone calls to the object of our scrutiny have gone unanswered. But I must admit, I rather enjoyed those encounters.
Because you're contemptible.
Even if my quarries seldom did.
Get out of here.
Time was that people never expected underworld figures, mafia members, to talk. But the so-called Code of Silence, or Omerta, didn't stop Jimmy the Weasel Fratiano or mob boss Joe Bonanno from sounding off to us like characters out of The Godfather.
You knew Al Capone.
Oh, I happen to know him, you know.
What kind of a man?
Al Capone was a very jolly guy.
Al Capone was a jolly guy?
Jolly guy.
You were a good killer.
I just had the talent to do things like that. I never made any mistakes.
Matter of some pride.
No, I just, some people are a little better than others. But I think it would bother me if I killed an innocent person.
What do you mean by an innocent person?
Well, you're an innocent person.
I'm glad to hear you you don't have designs.
Well,
but you killed 5 men.
Yeah.
You garroted 1 man in your living room.
I'd say I'm brutal, yeah. I admit that.
The first time I ever interviewed a mobster was back in the 1950s, and that mobster triggered what would be my first libel suit.
This live exchange with Los Angeles gangster Mickey Cohen was the first to put me on the courthouse steps.
Mick, you refuse to name crooked politicians. Yet you bitterly attack this apparently respectable police chief in your hometown, Chief Parker.
This man has no respect for decency. He's a known alcoholic. He's been disgusting, and he's a known degenerate. In other words, he's a sadistic degenerate of the worst type.
This is the chief of police of the city of Los Angeles. All right, now.
He has a
Mick,
man underneath him that
wait,
is on the equal basis of him.
What's his name?
His name is Captain James Hamilton, and he's probably a lower degenerate than Parker.
That was on ABC back in 1957. The program was live and was kinescoped for broadcast 3 hours later to the West Coast. Had the West Coast broadcast not gone on, I doubt there would have been a libel suit, but there was. Los Angeles Police Chief William Parker sued Cohen, ABC, and me. His colleague, James Hamilton, also sued. ABC decided not to defend, and the insurance company paid Parker $44,000, Hamilton half that. As for Mickey Cohen, he became a florist, and he died in 1976.
As a result of that Mickey Cohen episode, I was forced to conduct my live ABC interviews after that with a lawyer sitting in the studio off camera to offer me cue card legal advice. If he thought that I or my guest was wandering into possibly litigious territory, he'd flash a card saying, "Careful," or "Stop right now." People ask us if libel suits chill our yen to do investigative pieces. make us back off. Well, that has not been my experience, but it sure makes us very careful.
We will prevail in Vietnam over the communist aggressor.
General William Westmoreland is a patriot who wanted desperately to win the war in Vietnam. But in a 1982 CBS report, we presented evidence that General Westmoreland's command had misled the American people about the strength and numbers of enemy that U.S. troops were fighting in Vietnam. For if Americans were to learn the truth about what the U.S. was up against in Vietnam, they would have forced Lyndon Johnson even faster to pull our troops out. When I interviewed General Westmoreland back in 1981 about what his own intelligence chief and his own order of battle chief had discovered about enemy strength, and about the general's order to exclude Viet Cong paramilitary units, the Viet Cong so-called self-defense militia, from the order of battle, the general and I had a spirited exchange.
The fact is that these village defenders had a minimum to do with the outcome of the war. The punji stakes, sure, there were people hurt by punji stakes.
And mine.
But they had no offensive capability. This is a non-issue, Mike.
Well, here's the issue.
I made the decision. It was my responsibility. I don't regret making it. I stand by it. And the facts prove that I was right. Now, let's stop it.
All right, sir. You told me earlier that commanders-in-chief don't like to hear bad news. Presidents don't like to hear bad news.
Well, who does?
Nobody does.
Who does?
Right.
I mean, you're talking about human nature.
Of course. Isn't it a possibility that the real reason for suddenly deciding in the summer of 1967 to remove an entire category of the enemy from the order of battle, a category that had been in that order of battle since 1961, was based on political considerations?
No, decidedly not.
But according to a cable sent to the Joint Chiefs of Staff by General Creighton Abrams, General Westmoreland's deputy in Vietnam, the principal reason the self-defense militia had been omitted from projected enemy strength by General Westmoreland was press reaction.
Well, sure, they would have drawn an erroneous conclusion because it was a non-issue. It was a false issue. It would have totally clouded the situation, which would have been detrimental. But the fact is that since it was wrong, since it was not accurate, since it was not sound, would have brought about that impact, yes. But the basic reason was that it was unsound estimate.
The general eventually sued CBS, me, and assorted others, sued us for $120 million, claimed that what we painted as a deception about the enemy strength issue was simply a good faith dispute over intelligence estimates. The proceedings took 2.5 years and finally wound up with the general withdrawing his libel suit
CBS respects
simply for a statement from our side that acknowledged the general's patriotic performance of his duties as he saw them.
For its part, CBS News conducted a thorough internal re-examination of the facts we'd presented and remained firmly behind the broadcast. The general and his supporters picked up his legal tab, said to amount to some $3 million. CBS's was even more than that. It was an unhappy episode all around. But that occasionally is the price of investigative journalism, which incidentally we still do at 60 Minutes. In a moment, we'll take a trip back to the 50s to some fascinating characters out of that time capsule.
Which contemporary painters, if any, do you admire?
First Dali, after Dali, Picasso.
A person can be black as the ace of spades and think white. Think against Negro people. That's an Uncle Tom, by the way.
Mr. Wright, what do you think of Miss Monroe as architecture?
I think Miss Monroe's architecture is extremely good architecture.
Are you attracted to the kind of girls who pose in the nude?
I don't question a man's right to say a thing like that, but I'll break his arm if he says it about me.
Why'd you book me?
We're going to find out in the next
Are you really? You may be sorry.
First question. And this is serious.
Watch it, folks. This may be it.
If you had made your living in the early days of black and white television, as I did, you'd know that sometimes it was a little like the early days of flying, a seat-of-the-pants experience.
We all have something to apologize for, don't you think?
Listening to architect Frank Lloyd Wright focus on one of my bad habits was embarrassing. Embarrassing mainly because it took place on a show sponsored by the Philip Morris Tobacco Company.
Is that something that you feel like apologizing for?
Not at all. I enjoy it. Can I offer
But
you
such was the stuff of live television.
May I offer you one?
No, thank you. I wouldn't know how to smoke it.
My 1950s broadcasts Night Beat and
The Mike Wallace Interview
were unrehearsed.
We'll try to find out why.
No retake. Whatever the guest said or did, the viewers saw and heard.
Maybe my brain isn't big enough. Maybe I don't have a global mind.
For instance, this 1959 exchange with the feisty head of the Transport Workers Union, Mike Quilt. I was trying to get the combative union boss to reconcile his alleged left-leanings, he was called Red Mike, with his strict Catholic upbringing.
You raised the religious question. I don't like that question to be raised. I have told you on more than one occasion that I am a Catholic. Yes. That I don't beat my breast and say that I'm the best Catholic in the world. And you have no right to sit in judgment on me.
I'm not sitting in judgment. I'm simply asking a question. We are doing a profile of Mike Quilt.
I'm answering you the question. How many more times must I answer it?
All right. All right.
You want another answer on it?
I think that we've done it pretty well.
I'm ready any time you want to repeat the stupid question.
All right, Mike.
I didn't bother to repeat the stupid question. In the case of another interviewee of mine in the late 50s, it was decided by ABC that some sort of disclaimer was required, for racism was a subject which might make viewers uncomfortable, but more important, might make sponsors nervous.
There will be some, I'm sure, who will feel it is a mistake to give network exposure to Eldon Edwards, the imperial wizard of the Ku Klux Klan.
What Eldon Lee Edwards had to say was undeniably offensive, but beyond that, the interview revealed the imperial wizard as a monumentally stupid man.
In one piece of Klan literature that you furnished us, it is charged, quote, "One drop of Negro blood in your family destroys your white blood forever."
It stands to reason, it's common sense, that mongrelization means destruction. It means the destruction of the white race. It means the destruction of the nigger race. Now, sure, we believe in segregation for the simple reason we believe in preserving, protecting God's word. He created the white man. He intended for him to stay white. He created the nigger. He intended for him to stay black.
You do believe, then, a mixing of the blood of Negro and white will lead to the downfall of the white race and of the Negro race?
That's right, and eventually the destruction of this country.
Well, I'm sure that a good many Klan members were in the armed forces during the Korean War or the Second World War, and that some of them were wounded and needed blood transfusions. We were told last Friday that, quote, blood segregation is not practiced in the Army Medical Corps. In other words, some of your Klansmen probably have Negro blood in their veins, a fair amount of it, right now, as a result of transfusions that they received in the Army. By those circumstances, under those conditions, does that mean that they are not white men any longer?
Well, it could show up in their offspring.
If the message of the imperial wizard was offensive, there was something Americans found fearsome about the words of civil rights messenger Malcolm X.
Which we intend to bring into existence by any means necessary.
Malcolm X was a man of intellect and courage. He came out of the ghetto, out of prison, and eventually he relented in his bitterness toward the white man and achieved a position of strength and influence in the civil rights movement.
These are the things you should want to find out before you say hooray, hooray, hooray. Is that right or wrong?
But then, in 1965, he was assassinated, gunned down in New York by followers of the late Elijah Muhammad, leader of the black Muslims.
We will destroy you.
I had no idea how prophetic Malcolm was in 1964, just months before he was killed, when he gave one of the reasons why he had broken with the black Muslims, and with Elijah Muhammad in particular.
He made 6 sisters pregnant. They all had children. 2 of those 6 had 2 children. One of those 2 is having a child right now. I am told that there is a 7th sister who is supposed to be in Mexico right now, and she's supposed to be having a child by him.
Well, do you feel perhaps that you should now take over the leadership of the black Muslims?
No, I have no desire to take over the leadership of the black Muslims, and I have never had that desire. But I do have this desire. I have a desire to see the Afro-American in this country get the human rights that are his due to make a complete human being.
Are you the least bit afraid of what might happen to you as a result of making these revelations?
Oh, yes. I probably am a dead man already.
And he was right. The men convicted of killing Malcolm X were black Muslims. Thomas Johnson, Norman Butler, and Thomas Hagen. This man, Hagen, was guilty of the crime. He confessed his guilt to me in 1981, and he absolved the others.
You swear on Allah, by Allah, that you killed Malcolm X and that you were not helped by Norman Butler and Thomas Johnson.
I swear on it. I swear on it 1,000 times. I swear on it 1,000,000 times.
Butler was paroled from prison in 1985, Johnson in 1987. Hagen gets a parole hearing later this year.
Candor on the subject of sex on television in the 1950s was virtually forbidden. Surely there weren't many places that a militant feminist like Margaret Sanger could talk about contraceptives or abortion.
But when the founding mother of birth control in America sat down with me in 1957, we talked straightforwardly about birth control and the Catholic religion.
According to the tenets of Catholicism, they rule that birth control violates not only the Church's position, but they say that it violates a natural law. Therefore, birth control is a sin, no matter who practices it.
I think it's untrue, and I think it's unnatural.
Well, let me ask you...
Everything bears it out that it's an unnatural attitude to take. And how do they know? I mean, after all, they're celibates. They don't know love. They don't know marriage. They know nothing about bringing up children or any of the marriage problems of life. And yet they speak to people as if they were God.
That triggered a fair amount of mail.
I had hoped to be able tonight to show some clips from my first interview series, Night Beat, which ran on station WABD in New York in the middle 50s. But we were able to find only one or two of the original broadcasts in public or private collections. However, my colleagues who prepared this broadcast did manage to come up with one version of Night Beat, which they insist is a reasonable facsimile of my interviewing style then, as well as now.
Here are Carl Reiner and Sid Caesar back in 1957.
Ladies and gentlemen, let us meet Professor Ludwig von Integrity.
Don't start in with the Rembrandt, you know what I mean?
No.
Don't start in with, you know, the schnauzes and the, you know.
No, Will.
So you ask what size shoes I take, you know, and all that. You know, I'm a gentleman and being service. And ask, you know, if I wear pajamas, you know, but everything they fun.
Yes, Professor, well, you understand.
But don't give the shtuck.
No, you know what I mean? Professor, in 1923... Is that a picture of you, Professor?
Well, it looks a lot like me, I'll say that. But,
And you are with a chorus girl. And you're supposed to have sold over $450,000 worth of stock. You say you weren't fixing a fight. But you haven't said what you did with the gold mine money.
Why do you keep stucking in there?
In your 1935 income tax return.
I'll be back in a moment with some real-life memorable characters.
There's nothing to do with the ego. All I know is it sells.
So when they call you fascist...
Who calls me a fascist?
Are there many agents like you in the FBI?
I certainly hope not.
I'm not a spy. I'm not Mata Hari.
It's still peacetime espionage.
Oh, come on, John.
Quit trying to wrap it up.
So how can one say that I was a Nazi?
If I come down here a year from now, will you still be in power?
Mike Wallace, Then and Now, will continue.
People ask me who of all of the folks I've interviewed over the years, who were the most memorable. Fact is, there are far too many to squeeze into just this hour, but I have selected some who have left a lasting impression with me. The Vietnam era was full of such encounters.
And still they come. This is how thousands of young Americans have returned home from Vietnam. They come back aboard medevac planes. Medical evacuation, it is called.
I recall first off, back in 1969, interviewing a crippled Gary Bartlett in a Denver Veterans Hospital. Gary, who had been a high school basketball star, had lost both his legs up to his hips in Vietnam.
Gary, what do you think about...
In the middle of our interview, the hospital public address system began to play the national anthem.
Tell me something. Here it is, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. They're playing the Star-Spangled Banner. Does that mean anything special to you, or is it just a record that's playing at this time every afternoon?
Well, I don't know if it really means anything special. I feel rather proud to be a citizen of the United States, in a sense. I remember standing on the football field. When they played that, I felt about 10 feet tall. And I still do.
Are you proud that you made the sacrifice that you did?
Well, I don't know if I'm really proud. I was glad to go to Vietnam and glad to find out what it's about. But the sacrifice happened, therefore I can't really say whether I was happy about it or not. Maybe I'll find out. I've got to think on it for a while. Wait till I get my life started, then I'll pretty well know whether it was worth it or not.
When last we checked, Gary was living in Dighton, Kansas with his wife and daughter, and he still chokes a little, he told us, at football games when they play that anthem.
Did you know Lieutenant Calley?
Yes, he was my platoon leader.
Paul Meadlow was another story, another Vietnam veteran who got caught up in one of the most shameful episodes of that unhappy war. On March 16, 1968, Meadlow was one of a company of American soldiers who took part in the massacre in a place called My Lai. It was almost impossible to imagine. American soldiers had gunned down hundreds of unarmed Vietnamese civilians.
Men, women, and children.
Men, women, and children.
And babies.
And babies.
They weren't begging or saying no, no?
Right, they was begging and saying no, no, and the mothers was huddling their children, but they kept right on firing.
Why did you do it?
Why did I do it? Because I felt like I was ordered to do it. Well, at the time, I felt like I was doing the right thing.
You're married?
Right.
Children?
2.
Obviously, the question comes to my mind, the father of 2 little kids like that, how do you shoot babies?
I don't know, it's just one of them things.
The Army did not press charges against Paul Meadlow. He lives now in Terre Haute, Indiana, and by the way, those 2 children of Meadlow today are in the U.S. Army. One of the joys of this job is that you get to meet some unforgettable characters. Sister Thea was one of them, a Catholic nun from Canton, Mississippi. Warm, funny, and proud.
I would say to the kids, repeat after me, black is beautiful. Should I try it on Mike Wallace? Repeat after me, black is beautiful. Black is beautiful. Then you take your finger and you point it at yourself and you say, I am beautiful. And some children have a hard time saying that. I've been watching Miss America for 40-some years, and I've never seen one that looked exactly like me. When I say, I am beautiful, what does that mean? It means I'm caring. It means I respect myself. It means I'm confident. It means I'm poised. And they go through all that. I still didn't hear Mike Wallace say black is beautiful, though.
Black is beautiful.
Amen. Amen. All right. I'm so glad you're going to learn today.
Sister Thea died this year of cancer. She and I knew she had it when I interviewed her.
Bye-bye. Be good now.
We focus today, unhappily, as we have so often over the decades, on the Middle East. And no matter how many times I've gone back to the Middle East over 4 decades, despite the changing faces, changing times, the talk inevitably has gone to distrust and to that ever-elusive thing called peace.
I was Ben Gurion's foreign minister.
Yes. In this 1971 interview, I heard Israel's Prime Minister, Golda Meir, lament what I'd heard her say a number of times. But this time she spoke as a grandmother.
Is it so terrible that I look at my grandchildren and say to myself, I've been here 50 years. My children fought in the Second World War. They fought in the War of Liberation. Now I have my granddaughter is in the Army. My next grandson is 14 years old. I must look at him and say, well, maybe we'll have peace 4 years from 5 years. You go next. The next one is 13. The next one is 10. The next one is 8. Why? You tell me why.
Yasir Arafat has been one of the most durable figures in the Middle East. I once angered him so with one of my questions in Beirut that his colleagues suggested it might be prudent if I did not visit Beirut again for a while. What rattled the PLO chairman so was some talk about human rights.
Your president used to speak a lot about human rights. Where is this human rights when he is betraying the Palestinians.
Tell me something. We hear that there are Palestinians fighting alongside President Idi Amin in Uganda. Is that true?
For training mission. It is a training mission, and not more. To help him for training his army.
The butcher Amin, you help? And you talk about human rights?
I am not helping him as
You're helping to train his people. You admit it.
I am helping the Ugandan people. Idi Amin is not occupying any other country.
You are proud of your relationship with Idi Amin?
Yes.
The Shah of Iran was the most accessible major figure I have ever dealt with. He would answer any question, no holds barred, none. And he was never more forthcoming than in this 1976 interview.
Are you aware of a CIA psychological profile about you, sir?
No, I must admit that it's the first time I hear that.
Truly?
Yes? What is it?
Would you be interested in hearing what the CIA had to say?
Yes, why not?
Really?
Yes, why not?
I have your permission?
Yes, sure.
You won't send me to the Savak if I ask?
No, I would spare you this terrible ordeal of going through torture.
This secret study portrays the Shah as a brilliant but dangerous megalomaniac who is likely to pursue his own aims in disregard of U.S. interests.
So how could I be your man, your agent?
How do you mean?
Safeguarding your interests.
Well, it says that the Shah is an uncertain ally. His dreams of glory apparently...
I know. So you would like me to be your stooge?
That was a very confident Shah in 1976, but just 2 years earlier, in 1974, it was a prophetic king who talked of his dreams and his people.
Sometimes I have dreams which come true, and I don't like it.
Assassination attempts?
No, not that.
But you had premonition, you
had... Not that. When I was a kid, once I dreamt that there was a pit full of snakes, and obviously people who are always translating the dreams told me that these are your enemies. Things like that. It happens to everybody, probably. But I'm not afraid of my people, and that's because this confidence exists between me and my people. They trust in me, I trust in them.
I interviewed the Shah's successor only once. It was shortly after the Americans at the U.S. Embassy in Tehran had been taken hostage, and the Ayatollah Khomeini made it clear in the interview that those hostages would not be going home soon. But the question that drew his attention most palpably was this one.
Imam President Sadat of Egypt, a devoutly religious man, a Muslim, says that what you are doing now is, quote, a disgrace to Islam. And he calls you, Imam, forgive me, his words, not mine, a lunatic.
The translator worried about even translating the question, but he did.
That's what I heard President Sadat say on American television.
Yes.
That the Imam is a disgrace to Islam, and he used the word a lunatic.
And the Ayatollah promptly called for the assassination of Anwar Sadat, which, of course, is just what happened.
Prickly questions are always unwelcome, no matter where or to whom they're asked. For example, this exchange during the tense and bitter time of Watergate with former Richard Nixon White House aide John Ehrlichman.
Let me read them. A list of acts committed by people in the White House or employed by people in the White House or employed by people in the cabinet, breaking and entering. Wiretapping. Conspiracy to foster prostitution. Conspiracy to commit kidnapping. Destruction of government documents. Secret slush funds. Laundering money in Mexico. Perjury. Plans to audit tax returns for political retaliation. Bogus opinion polls. Plans to firebomb a building. Conspiracy to obstruct justice. All of this by the law and order administration of Richard Nixon.
Is there a question in there somewhere?
Coming up, some first ladies and their husbands.
Prime Minister, do you see no similarity of purpose between the Menachem Begin
of 30 years ago, 1947, and the Yasir Arafat of today.
And who?
Golda Meir.
The old lady.
Could she do more than Menachem Begin to make peace?
Sadat will not make peace with Israel.
I have a son studying in the United States.
Yes, I know.
我知道. We have democracy in my family.
Can a 69-year-old man run for the presidency of the United States and win? If his is the Teflon presidency,
yes,
nothing sticks.
Mine was the opposite.
There's no politics in this thing for me. Good heavens. You'd have to be hallucinating to think there was any political mileage in this kind of a job.
Two men I would come to know over the years took part in the first televised presidential debate on this very September night 30 years ago.
The candidates need no introduction. The Republican candidate, Vice President Richard M. Nixon, and the Democratic candidate, Senator John F. Kennedy.
Of the two future presidents, I knew Richard Nixon better, although Jack Kennedy once was a neighbor of mine. Jack Kennedy and I were born a year apart and half a block away from each other in Brookline, Massachusetts. But his dad, Joe Kennedy, made a lot of money early and they moved up and on. It wasn't till the mid-50s that our paths finally crossed again, and it was on the Mike Wallace interview back on December 7th, 1957. that powerful and often feared newspaper columnist Drew Pearson saw to it that Jack Kennedy and I got to know each other better.
He's the only man in history that I know who won a Pulitzer Prize on a book which was ghostwritten for him, which indicates the kind of public relations build-up he's had.
Who wrote the book for him?
I don't recall at the present moment.
You know for a fact, yes, Drew, that the book,
I do know,
Profiles in Courage, was written for Senator Kennedy by somebody else?
I do.
And he got a Pulitzer Prize for it, and...
It didn't take the Kennedy family long to react. Phones began to ring in Washington, Massachusetts, and at ABC in New York. Drew Pearson would not apologize, nor would I. ABC was quick to issue a statement.
We deeply regret this error and feel that it does a grave injustice to a distinguished public servant and author.
But what the viewers did not know as the ABC executive read the network statement was that it had been written not by network lawyers, but by a powerful Washington lawyer named Clark Clifford. Clifford was Jack Kennedy's personal attorney and a longtime Washington insider. And he revealed to me just a few months ago just how angry the Kennedys had been.
My phone rang. It was Senator Kennedy. Said, I must see you at once. Came to my office. He said, I've written the book, as you know, Profiles in Courage. Drew Pearson said I didn't write the book. He said, it's terribly upsetting to me. About that time, the phone rang. It was for Senator Kennedy. It was his father. And he listened to him a while, and he said, Father, I'll put Clark on. I get on the phone. He says, this is Ambassador Kennedy. I said, yes, Mr. Ambassador. He says, sue the bastards for $50 million. So I said, well, we're going to look into it. Sue the bastards for $50 million.
Why was it so important to him at that moment? Why was it so important to his father that he wanted to sue this illegitimate and his employer's ABC for $50 million?
I didn't know at that time why it was so important, and I wondered a little about it. But it wasn't long after that that in another talk with Senator Kennedy, he said, I am preparing to run for President of the United States.
When I asked Jack Kennedy about the controversy, he produced some of his handwritten notes and research, which he said proved his authorship of Profiles. But historian Herbert Parmet, after a long and thorough investigation of much of that same material, determined that Jack Kennedy could hardly have been the sole author, that Kennedy insider Ted Sorensen played more than a researcher's role. And Herbert Parmet's conclusion is persuasive.
On the day that President Kennedy was gunned down in Texas in 1963, I was in New York anchoring the CBS Morning News. Clint Hill, a man I didn't know and wouldn't meet for another 12 years, was in Dallas, just a few feet from the president. It was the job of Secret Service agent Clint Hill on that day, as it had been on countless others, to protect the president.
Can I take you back to November 22nd in 1963? You were on the fender of the Secret Service car, right behind President Kennedy's car. At the first shot, you ran forward and jumped on the back of the president's car in less than 2 seconds, pulling Mrs. Kennedy down into her seat, protecting her. She had climbed out of the back and she was on the way back, right?
And because of the fact that part of her husband's head had been shot off and gone off to the street.
She wasn't trying to climb out of the car. She was...
No. She was simply trying to reach that head, part of the head.
To bring it back.
It's the only thing.
Was there anything that the Secret Service or that Clint Hill could have done to keep that from happening?
Clint Hill, yes.
Clint Hill, yes? What do you mean?
If he had reacted about 0.5 of a second faster, or maybe a second faster, I wouldn't be here today.
You mean you would have gotten there and you would have taken the shot?
The third shot, yes, sir.
And that would have been all right with you?
That would have been fine with me.
But you couldn't. You got there in less than 2 seconds, Clint. You couldn't have gotten there. You surely don't have any sense of guilt about that.
Yes, I certainly do. It's my fault.
Oh. No one has ever suggested that for an instant.
If I had reacted just a little bit quicker, and I could have, I guess. And I'll live with that to my grave.
Clint Hill suffered deeply after Dallas, and he took early retirement. He still suffers from those few fateful moments.
Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis has never spoken publicly about that day in Dallas, or for that matter, about any part of her life with Jack Kennedy. But other First Ladies I've known have been less loath to talk with candor about their days in the White House and about the men they married. The first First Lady I met was FDR's widow, Eleanor Roosevelt.
Mrs. Roosevelt, but I think that you will agree that a good many people hated your husband. They even hated you.
Oh, yes, and a great many do still.
Why? Why?
Oh, there was a real core of hatred. The people who would call him that man, and the people who would gladly. I remember one man who rejoiced, actually, when he died.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear.
There were many Americans who didn't care much for Jimmy Carter when he was in the White House, but his wife Rosalind has never shied away from defending him or his policies, nor from talking candidly about the man who took her husband's job away from him, Ronald Reagan.
Well, I wouldn't trade places with him in history, with Jimmy and Ronald Reagan, for anything in the world. I think this president makes us comfortable with our prejudices.
That's not very nice. What you're saying.
But it's the way I feel, and I think it's true.
Hello, Nancy Reagan. How are you?
Glad to see you.
It's nice to see you, and I didn't expect that you would be a candidate's wife tonight, did you?
No, I didn't. I heard it over television.
My old friend, Nancy Reagan.
Your husband didn't even consult you before?
At the 1968 Republican convention, Nancy Reagan's mother, Edie Davis, who first introduced us in Chicago back in the 1940s, reminded me of our long relationship.
You tell the children how to raise their children?
Oh, heavens, no. I want them to still speak to me.
Well, you did such a good job yourself.
You helped me.
What's that?
You helped me.
I helped.
It is sticky sometimes for a reporter to cover his friends, and Ronald and Nancy Reagan were friends of mine. So I tried to keep a kind of distance, not wanting to be perceived as being cozy with them. Over the years, I'd asked Ronald Reagan a number of questions which upset him and his friends.
How many blacks are there on your top campaign staff, Governor?
I couldn't honestly answer you. No.
That speaks for itself.
Huh?
I say that speaks for itself.
No, because I can't tell you how many people are on the staff.
But you can tell black from white.
Oh, yes.
But his wife, Nancy, remained a friend of mine, open with me until she wrote her book, My Turn. And once again, I felt I had to ask her some difficult questions about things that she herself had raised in her book.
What was your husband's role in Iran-Contra?
Nothing. I mean, it was...
He was president of the United States.
It was what... I don't know enough about Iran-Contra. Mike, to talk to you intelligently about it. All I know is that he did not think he had done anything wrong. He didn't know of anything that was going on.
You're going to be in Japan, and I'm told it's a $2 million 2 weeks.
They're getting 2 of us. They're working us like crazy.
But it's going to be a well-recompensed 2 weeks.
It is for everybody who goes there, which you probably know. Now, you really didn't need that question.
That apparently tore it. A friendship of 40 years foundered on this episode. We haven't spoken since.
The nominee of this convention, Richard M. Nixon.
Patricia Nixon was not a first lady who felt at ease or comfortable with the press. Someone, I think it was Gloria Steinem, dubbed Mrs. Nixon Plastic Pat. She was anything but that. During the 1968 campaign, I covered the Nixon family, and I found Mrs. Nixon warm and caring and very vulnerable, and always guarded when newsmen and cameras were nearby.
We've known him for 20 years. He's held our little children in his arms, and we consider him almost a member of our family.
Good of you to call. And
Richard Nixon, who in 1968 offered me a job as his press secretary, I preferred to stay at CBS, was himself never comfortable with the media. In a 1968 interview just prior to his election, he talked to me about charisma and the presidency.
When style and charisma connotes the idea of contriving of public relations, I don't buy it at all. Let me make this one point. Some public men are destined to be loved, and other public men are destined to be disliked. But the most important thing about a public man is not whether he's loved or disliked, but whether he's respected. And I hope to restore respect to the presidency.
One of the perks of these past 4 decades has been time spent drawing profiles of some of the world's most gifted musicians, most talented entertainers.
You're going to take this up, Mike. You got a lot of hostility.
I'd rather beat on you.
But of all of those who brightened an interview with laughter or music, Maestro Vladimir Horowitz struck a special chord.
Maestro, tell me something.
Oh,
50th anniversary. Over. In other words, you have no intention whatsoever of retiring.
Oh, my God, no.
Me too.
And when they call you arrogant and cruel, the devil, and evil,
Sexual maniac?
You were difficult. Let me stop you there for a minute.
not difficult, impossible. I've heard this over and over again.
Where'd you go wrong?
That's a perfectly good question.
No one expected you to survive. You know that.
Gotcha.
He's supposed to know what's going on.
There seems to be some kind of,
Okay? That man's gonna go.
Who is the man? Scare him. Fight him. Hit him harder.
Doesn't answer it for me.
But you do not intend to stop.
Mike Wallace, good night.
This is CBS.